Welcome to Pray for Rain. I am your host, Jack Willis. It's wonderful to be with you today. When I lived in Austin several years ago, I went on a brewery tour. And so they'll take you around the brewery and show you how the beer gets made, and they take you in the back and they show you the big tanks. And the guy who worked there, who was taking us on the tour, was a bit of a deadhead. He had long hair, and I'm sure he would have taken acid if anybody had offered it from the group. But he's showing us how the beer gets made. So he points out the lager tank and the Pilsner tank and the IPA tank. And someone on the tour asks, what does IPA stand for? What's the origin story there? And he says, oh yeah, IPA, that's India Pale Ale, because the British, they use this style of beer making, to get the beer to the colonies in India, right? And so we should probably change the name of the beer because of colonialism, right? And I thought, what the hell are you asking me for? I don't know the history of this beer. Also, no, sir, I don't necessarily agree that we should change the name because the British were involved. For all I know, the children of India could have loved that delicious beer. And I bring up this story because something is happening in the way that we use language. Somewhere along the way, speech stopped being as declarative and became much more needy. Now we seem to ask for approval before we've even finished the sentence. And I am guilty of this too. I think most of us are. But if you sit in a cafe and you just open your ears for 10 minutes, almost every sentence now seems to ask for permission in some way. Like, right, does that make sense? These sentences have this upward inflection at the end that asks, is this okay? It's like we need a thumbs up mid-thought all the time. We're just drowning in micro-affirmations. And I think it shows up most when we're talking about anything even slightly serious, if that's money or politics or dating, art, whatever it is. We'll start a sentence and then subconsciously ask people to greenlight it for us before we're done. And what that does, to me at least, it signals to my lizard brain that I have to look at them and I have to nod along. They're using this social cue that I feel like I have to respond to, even when I don't agree. And it's subconscious a lot of the time too. It's asking for more than acknowledgement. I'm being asked to reassure them, yes, we agree. Yes, this opinion is allowed here. And I'm not saying that we should become stoned-faced psychos when we look at each other and when we speak to one another. But I do feel like this phenomenon has just gone so far. And all of it makes me think about a piece that Orwell wrote in 1946, Politics in the English Language. And one of his great arguments in that is that when language becomes imprecise and stale and cluttered, we become easier to manipulate. And his point was that governments and institutions can hide really ugly things behind bland language or clinical terms and dead metaphors. A government never says, we killed civilians. It says, there's been collateral damage. The phrase kind of disinfects reality. And he's right. A lot of official language is designed to make reality harder to discern and more difficult to figure out what actually happened. But I think that he was right about this, but in the wrong direction, or it's proven to change directions over the decades. The decay isn't coming from the top down as much. I think it's coming from the bottom up. Nobody forced us to say like every 0.92 seconds. There's no government memo requiring right at the end of a sentence. Big Brother isn't forcing us to speak this way. We are our own little language tyrants. And again, I speak like this too, so I'm very much a part of this problem. But Orwell worried that language, the degradation of language, made us vulnerable to manipulation by governments and institutions. And I think the way that we speak now makes us vulnerable to a different kind of manipulation, the tyranny of majority opinion. And there's another great 20th century thinker who I think has something to add to this. It's Hannah Arendt. And she wrote a lot about the distinction between truth and opinion. And the idea that some things are true outside of people's opinions about the things. She was worried about the conflation of facts with our opinions, that it leads people to question established truths. And she was a genius, so I think she was right as well. But again, I think there I think we've created a bottom-up version of the same problem. When even factual statements are delivered in a tone of nervous opinion, facts start to feel socially negotiable. And sometimes people are wrong about their facts, and it's not certain where the truth lies. But if you add a question mark to the end of everything you say, it continually summons doubt. And her point was that factual truth is fragile. It doesn't defend itself. It requires people willing to state it plainly without hedging. And we hear this kind of hedging all the time now. It practically defines the modern era. Cold, hard facts of reality that have become smothered in doubt and social terror. You'll hear things like, there seems to be some biological differences between men and women, which is basic biology, but it's stated so tentatively because the social cost of saying it obviously feels very high to people. We are losing ground. When we constantly seek confirmation, speech becomes a form of real-time censorship. You're not saying what you think. You're producing the opinion that you think is allowed. It makes me wonder, what do we lose when the engine of our speech becomes consensus? And I think we lose a plurality of thought. We get closer to a monoculture. It's censorship by committee, except the committee doesn't even really exist. It's imaginary based on what we think other people are thinking. We become hostage to opinions that we think that everybody else holds, even when they're not ours. And to be fair, this isn't always a conscious need for affirmation, because sometimes these words are just used like a verbal pause, and I do it all the time. Instead of taking a breath, I'll say, right, and buy myself a half a second in order to think of what I'm going to say. But if those words are always there, even when we don't mean them literally, what is that doing to us? And what is that indicative of? Where did that come from? And I'd argue that they are artifacts of us not wanting to offend people, of us not wanting to transgress. We are very wary of causing offense. And with each successive generation, that seems to be more true. When people talk about safe spaces, I largely think this is what they're referring to, even if they don't know it. It's the way that we censor our speech in order to make others feel safe. And I don't think it's necessarily all bad, or that comes from a bad instinct, because it comes from not wanting to cause harm to others. But I just feel like the second order effects of that have been very expensive. Now, I want to talk about everyone's favorite topic in relation to that, to this, which is boomers, because I think that they are instructive here. But before I do, I want to say that I really hate this generational warfare thing that's going on. I think it's so toxic. We can't be at war with everyone, everywhere, in all directions at all times. And whatever you may or may not like about boomers, if I were born when they were born, guess how I'd act? I'd act like a boomer. I'd love Jell-O and the Eagles. And if I were born 10 years ago, I'd be listening to Jack Harlow and Looksmaxing. We are all Americans and largely products of the world that we were brought up in. Not that we can't criticize anything about one another, but we need to have a sense of perspective here. Anyhow, if you listen to a baby boomer speak, maybe that's your grandparents or your great-grandparents at this point, it's a bit like time traveling. They don't have the same consensus-seeking software installed. They don't say like and right nearly as much, which is honestly beautiful at a basic communication level. It's like Braille for your ears. You can feel each word. And when the rest of us talk, it can be so smooth and meaningless and hard to grab onto. But their sentences figuratively and literally end with periods. A statement, stop, then another statement, stop. They didn't grow up training at the internet gym all day, every day. They wrote letters. They were forced to create some sort of coherent statements on paper. And we increasingly never do that. When is the last time you wrote a letter? An email is about as close as we get to that. And now we use Claude for those. So the opportunities for us to stack language in lucid fashion are just withering with each data center that we build, it seems. The mediums of communication have just become fragmented and instant and bloated with emojis. And when messaging is instant, there's no reason to lay out a full thought because you can just tack on another word, another emoji, another GIF, or whatever it is. But if you're writing a letter, it would be insane to just reply lol and send it back and then wait another 2 weeks for the turnaround. If you've ever received a text from a boomer, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You'll get something like, looking forward to seeing you at Thanksgiving, period. Which sounds almost threatening to me now. I'll think, is Grandpa gonna f me up? And to be clear, I'm not saying that we offend the snowflakes or that kind of thing, because being intentionally cruel, that's not cool. But our need to homogenize speech into this soft serve approval language is bad for society, and it is bad for thinking. Now, in the middle of drafting this episode, I ran into the comedian Mark Norman, who apparently lives in my neighborhood. So I was walking down the street and he's sitting in a cafe and I see him and I think, hey, I went to one of your shows in Austin. I should say something. That feels earned. So I waved to him. I said, hey, went to you in Austin. It was a great show. And he gives me a thumbs up and says, comedy. And he's really nice. And then we start chatting. And I can notice my brain starting to do this thing when we're chatting where it's trying to turn my speech into something that I think he might want to hear. At least I'm trying to guess at what that would be. And I said something like, for sure, Austin, it's just so great for comics. And I have no idea if that's true. I'm kind of talking out my ass at this point. And then he asked me, are you a comic? And I pause and I sort of stall out. And I'm not a comic. I'm a fucking idiot because I was thinking about how I wanted to respond to a question when the answer is no. I can't really say that I am, which is just an insane way to respond when you're not a stand-up at all. The answer is no. My brain wanted the conversation to go in a certain way more than it wanted to state the facts about my life. It really kept me up the other night. I don't know what's wrong with me. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to. The factual answer was easy, no, but I didn't want the factual answer. I wanted the socially optimal answer. I turned into a word salad because I was looking for approval. That is all I have for you today, so I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me. And until next time, I am praying for rain.